The night pressed in like a living thing, swallowing the edges of the Bohemian forest until even the trees seemed to recoil into themselves, as if afraid of what moved between their roots on that bitter evening in December of 1944. Snow fell without sound, a pale curtain over the Czech borderlands, where patrols marched with rifles stiffened by frost and fear. That winter had carved hollow spaces into the landscape and into the people who dared to cross it, leaving only whispers of the souls it claimed. It was along this treacherous stretch of border, where the German occupation tightened its grip like a closing fist, that 17 students from Ostrava University vanished without leaving a footprint of explanation. They had been young and reckless in the way only the condemned can be, carrying with them a forbidden map scrawled with cryptic markings that suggested hidden corridors beneath the border fortifications. A fragment of rumor, a breath of hope, a possibility of escape from a war that was devouring every future. But hope, in that place, had a way of turning feral. The last witness to see them alive was an aging station guard who claimed the students boarded a supply wagon, repurposed for resistance travel. He remembered their frozen breath, hanging in the cold air like a quiet cloud, their eyes focused, determined, yet trembling with the weight of uncertainty. They carried lanterns dimmed with cloth, muffling the light so it would not betray their movements. The night train rattled toward the frontier, toward the iron shadows that separated one dying world from another. And then, as if pulled into the marrow of the earth, they were gone. No wreckage, no bodies, no scattered belongings to freeze under the winter moon. Only the wind remained, and even it seemed reluctant to speak. For decades, the disappearance lived on, not as a resolved event, but as a wound that refused to scar. Families visited the border long after the war had ended, tracing the same path the students might have taken, trying to imagine the final sound they heard. The rustle of a uniform, the clatter of a rifle safety, the low growl of engines hidden beneath the canopy of night. Or perhaps there had been no sound at all, only the sudden and terrible quiet that comes when something steps outside the expected order of the world. People whispered theories like prayers, each one more unsettling than the last, a failed escape plan, a betrayal from within the resistance movement, a secret Nazi experiment buried in the system of underground bunkers, known to exist in fragments beneath the Sudeten mountains. But in truth, no one knew why 17 young lives had been erased so completely that their absence felt more supernatural than historical. And you, watching this now, might carry your own instinct about what happened that night. Stories like this awaken something ancient in us, something that recognizes that the earth remembers what we forget. While you listen, tell me in the comments where you are watching from, so the echo of this mystery stretches a little farther into the night, carried by new voices across new borders, refusing to be buried again. The map the students carried had been thought lost forever, swallowed by the same darkness that had claimed them. Scholars mentioned it only in footnotes, as if afraid that acknowledging its existence too fully might summon its curse. It had been created, or so the resistance believed, by a cartographer forced into German service, a man who used his access to military survey work to encode forbidden routes for the desperate and the hunted. His name had faded into dust, but his work lived on in rumors of tunnels carved through ancient mines, of forgotten drainage channels beneath abandoned fortresses, of smugglers' paths older than any border. The students had obtained a copy through underground channels, though no one ever determined how. That map was their talisman, their compass, the small fragile promise that survival still existed somewhere beyond the horizon of war. But if the map had been their hope, it had also been their doom. Then, nearly 80 years later, in the quiet spring of 2023, a farmer repairing a collapsed stone wall in the village of Dolní Lutyně unearthed something wrapped in layers of rotting canvas. At first he thought it was an old ledger, or perhaps the remnants of a soldier's kit bag, but when he touched it, the cloth crumbled at his fingertips and revealed a roll of parchment sealed with black wax marked by a symbol no one could immediately place. The farmer took it to the local historical society, thinking it might be some forgotten wartime artifact among thousands. But when the archivist unrolled it beneath a dim lamp, the room fell into a hush so complete it felt as though the world paused to listen. It was the student's map, or at least a version of it, its ink preserved better than anyone could explain. Across the parchment stretched a network of lines, curves, dotted paths, and hand-drawn annotations in a hurried script. Some sections were crossed out violently, others corrected, others encircled as if they represented points of great risk. And in the lower corner, faint but undeniable, were 17 initials. This discovery reopened wounds that had almost turned to legend. Journalists flocked to the small village, researchers pored over every mark, and descendants of the vanished students traveled great distances to see the artifact that might be the last object their loved ones touched. The map itself exuded an unsettling aura, not because it was inherently sinister, but because it whispered the weight of choices made under the threat of annihilation. Certain markings corresponded to known military installations that should not have existed in 1944, at least not according to official records. Other symbols matched no known surveying system, and one section showed a corridor diving beneath the border where no tunnel had ever been documented. Authorities dismissed these anomalies as misinterpretations, but independent historians insisted the cartographer might have known something the public never did. As the story resurfaced, so did the old fears. Locals muttered about lights seen near the border on winter nights, long before the map was found. Strange metallic hums that vibrated through the ground near the abandoned bunkers. And an account from a retired forester who claimed that, years earlier, he had come across a pit in the woods that hadn't been there before. A circular depression in the snow, as if something enormous had been lowered into the earth and then lifted out again. When he returned months later, the pit was gone, smoothed over as if erased by a careful hand. No one believed him at the time. Now, his story resurfaced like a corpse rising through thawing ice. Investigators in 2023 examined the terrain where the students were last known to travel, comparing the map's markings to modern surveys. To their unease, several points aligned perfectly with features that had not existed on wartime maps, suggesting the original cartographer had access to restricted information. Even more disturbing was a symbol repeated 3 times along the central corridor, a symbol resembling an eye crossed by a diagonal slash. Its meaning remained unknown, though folklore from the region spoke of watchers in the mountains, entities said to guard forbidden paths. Scholars dismissed this as superstition, but symbols have a way of surviving longer than the languages that invent them. One detail on the recovered map drew particular attention. Near the supposed tunnel entrance, the cartographer had written a single phrase in Czech, "Where the echo stops." That line alone spawned endless speculation. Was it a literal instruction for navigating subterranean passages? A poetic warning? Or did it describe some phenomenon the students encountered just before they vanished? Acoustic engineers later noted that certain underground chambers can cancel echoes completely due to their shape, creating pockets of unnatural silence. The thought that the students may have reached such a place, only to discover something waiting in that silence, brought a chill far colder than the December air of 1944, as night fell over the villages bordering the forest, and as more details of the map were released to the public. People began revisiting old fears passed down through generations. They remembered how the war had twisted the land into something predatory, how the forest had seemed to develop its own appetite. They remembered the stories of soldiers who patrolled the border and reported hearing voices underground, voices that mimicked commands in perfect German, only to fall silent when approached. Whether these stories were products of fear or something darker remained unanswered. Yet when faced with the resurfaced map, many began to wonder whether the Earth itself had played a role in the disappearance, aiding or consuming the students in ways no Army report would ever confess. The investigation into the 2023 discovery quickly reached international attention. Archivists pieced together fragments of the original resistance network. Historians re-examined testimonies once dismissed as unreliable, and geologists explored regions near the border previously deemed too unstable. The deeper they searched, the more they encountered inconsistencies, geological strata that did not align with known mining operations, cavities beneath the soil that seemed to shift location over time. Even satellite imagery showed faint outlines of shapes too symmetrical to be natural, yet too deteriorated to be man-made with conventional tools. What emerged was a mosaic of half-truths, lost records, invisible corridors, and the shadows of 17 absent footsteps that refused to fade. If you find yourself wondering where those students walked in their final moments, you are not alone. Their steps echo still, faint but insistent, calling across nearly a century to anyone willing to listen. Before this story pulls you deeper into the cold, remember to subscribe to the channel so you won't miss the unraveling of what happened beneath that silent border, where history and darkness intertwine. The days following the discovery of the map in 2023 felt charged, as if the air itself held an electric memory of what had happened beneath the soil all those decades ago. The archivist responsible for analyzing the artifact, a woman named Dr. Klara Vavrova, began her work with the methodical calm of a scientist, yet even she confessed that something about the map disturbed her on an instinctive level. It wasn't only the strange symbols or the precision of the drawings. It was the ink itself. Under ultraviolet light, the ink shimmered faintly, revealing hidden etchings invisible to the naked eye, thin spirals and intersecting lines that seemed to map not geography, but sound, acoustic patterns, according to one of the technicians who studied the markings. Frequencies, perhaps. But why would a resistance cartographer, in the midst of war, embed acoustic signatures into a map of escape routes? The team decided to overlay the map onto a modern satellite scan of the WWII border region. What emerged sent a shiver through the group. The tunnels depicted, the ones thought to be legends or mistranslations, aligned with zones where magnetic interference had been recorded since the early 2000s, areas where compasses spun without reason and electronic signals faltered. Most of these anomalies lay within an abandoned mining complex sealed off by the Soviet administration after the war. Officially, the closure was due to instability in the rock structure, but locals whispered of something else, of voices that traveled through the mine shafts long after the workers were gone, and of machinery that sometimes rumbled deep below, even though no one had entered in years. Dr. Vavrova's team gained temporary access to the outer tunnels in May 2023. What they found was a labyrinth of narrow corridors carved unevenly through stone, many of them descending at unnatural angles, as if following a different gravity. The air was thick with moisture and metallic dust, and their lights struggled against the dark. In the deepest section they could reach, they found what appeared to be an old generator room, half collapsed and overtaken by roots. On the far wall, scratched into rusted metal, were 17 marks, tallies crudely drawn in sequence, followed by a line that cut through them all, as if to strike them from existence. The scratches were old, and when the team dated the corrosion on the surface, it placed the etching's origin sometime between 1943 and 1946. It might have been coincidence. It might have been meaningless graffiti. But when one of the assistants, a quiet postgraduate student named John, counted the marks and whispered that there were exactly 17, no one responded. The silence felt heavier than the stone above them. Above ground, the media frenzy was reaching fever pitch. Every headline demanded answers. Who were the 17? What was the map hiding? The Czech Ministry of Culture attempted to contain the narrative, but speculation spread like wildfire. Conspiracy forums linked the disappearance to Nazi occult research, to Soviet cover-ups, even to extraterrestrial contact beneath the border mountains. Meanwhile, descendants of the missing students held vigils, lighting candles near the railway tracks, where their ancestors had last been seen. One woman, the granddaughter of a girl named Helena Dvorakova, claimed she had dreamt for years of a place made of stone corridors and frozen echoes, a place she never understood until she saw the images from the mine. Then something changed. During the third week of the excavation, the survey team began reporting a recurring low-frequency vibration emanating from deep within the sealed tunnels. The sound came in intervals as if in a pattern and caused their instruments to malfunction. It wasn't seismic activity. The local geology was stable. The sound was deliberate, mechanical, rhythmic. A pulse. It reverberated through the walls, through the equipment, through their bones. The team withdrew after several members complained of headaches, dizziness, and nausea. When analyzed later, the recording of that vibration revealed something that made even the skeptics uneasy. Layered beneath the main pulse were faint modulations resembling speech. Though too distorted to identify the language, experts from the Czech Technical University were called in. They isolated the frequencies and attempted to clean the recording. After several days of filtering, one phrase seemed to emerge, repeated in intervals like a haunting refrain. It was faint, incomplete, but unmistakably human. Under the echo, we wait. From that moment, the project shifted from archaeology to something darker, something the government preferred not to discuss publicly. Access to the tunnels was abruptly suspended. Officially, the explanation was concern for worker safety due to instability in the structure. Unofficially, security personnel began patrolling the area 24 hours a day. Dr. Vavrova's team was ordered to hand over all digital copies of their scans. They complied, but not before saving fragments of the data under disguised file names. She knew too well how history was often rewritten in silence. Through those fragments, an image began to form. Beneath the surface, below the official mining tunnels, there existed another layer. One not built by industrial tools but carved with eerie precision. The stone walls were smoothed, curved, and patterned in ways no mining operation would require. And along those walls, the acoustic patterns from the map appeared again, etched directly into the rock. It was as if the entire underground structure had been designed to conduct sound, to amplify certain frequencies while absorbing others. One of the engineers described it as an enormous listening chamber. But listening to what? Legends from the area mentioned the hollow beneath the border, a mythical void said to hum on winter nights, where the voices of the dead gathered to speak to those who dared to enter. The rational mind dismisses such things, yet the more scientists measured, the less rational the place seemed. The tunnels bent sound in ways no natural cave should. Whispers traveled too far, while shouts vanished into immediate silence. It was a geography that felt alive, responsive, even aware. By midsummer, rumors spread that Dr. Vavrova herself had gone missing. She stopped answering calls. Her last email to a colleague contained a single line and an attached image. The image showed a section of the map with a new marking added in her handwriting. A circle around a small cross, annotated with the word, "Still moving." The line in her message read simply, "The map isn't fixed, it's adapting." That was when the investigation fell into chaos. Access to the archive in Ostrava was revoked, and military trucks were seen entering the restricted zone near the forest at night. No official statement was made. Journalists attempting to film were detained and had their footage confiscated. Whatever had been found underground was no longer a matter of public curiosity. It had become a matter of containment. Local residents reported strange activity in the following weeks. Flocks of birds avoiding the area, dogs refusing to enter the woods, an odor, faint but pervasive, of ozone and rust, and on certain nights, when the wind moved from the south, a deep sound carried across the fields, a low, pulsing rhythm that seemed to echo from the soil itself. Farmers said their fences vibrated faintly, like strings on a giant instrument tuned to a forgotten key. It was around this time that an independent researcher from Brno, named Tomáš Havel, released a video compiling his own findings on the disappearance. Using declassified resistance records and testimonies from survivors, he reconstructed the students' route as faithfully as possible. His theory was chilling. The 17 never intended to escape through the tunnels. They were trying to destroy something buried there. Havel pointed to several phrases hidden in coded messages intercepted by the Gestapo in late 1944, referencing Project Nebel, or the Fog. According to his interpretation, it was an experimental weapons system designed to manipulate sound waves as a method of communication or psychological control. If true, it would explain the acoustic anomalies, the strange resonance patterns, even the phrase, "where the echo stops." The students might have been resistance agents attempting to sabotage the experiment. But something went wrong. Havel's video went viral before being abruptly removed. His channel was deleted, his accounts deactivated. No one could reach him afterward. Some said he was silenced. Others believed he'd simply vanished into the same myth he had tried to unravel. And so, the legend deepened. The borderlands, once a place of forgotten history, became alive again with rumor and dread. Each winter, locals claimed to hear voices rising from beneath the snow, sometimes faint, sometimes clear, always the same. 17 distinct tones that wove together into a haunting chorus. They said it wasn't singing, it was calling. If you're still here, drawn into this descent as we are, let the darkness remind you to leave a like on this story. So the echo keeps spreading, and their voices are never silenced again. By autumn 2023, the village of Dolny Lutinya had transformed from a quiet agricultural settlement into a kind of living fault line between curiosity and fear. Reporters still lingered, though fewer each week, driven off by government restrictions and the slow spread of unease. The locals had learned not to speak too loudly about the sounds coming from beneath the forest, about the vibrations that made their windows tremble in the night, or about the feeling, described by many, that something was listening. The ground had become more than soil. It felt aware. In the weeks after Dr. Klara Vavrova's disappearance, her apartment in Ostrava was searched by officials claiming to represent the National Archive Authority. Yet when the property manager was later interviewed, she mentioned that they had no insignia, no paperwork, no names. They entered at dusk and left before dawn, taking several boxes and her computer. All that remained in the flat was an old reel-to-reel recorder still plugged into the wall. On it, a single tape, labeled only with the words, "Echo Field Test 4. When a journalist from a local newspaper managed to acquire and digitize the recording, what it contained was unlike anything anyone expected. The tape began with 30 seconds of static, followed by the sound of dripping water, slow, deliberate, resonant. Then a faint hum appeared, growing gradually into a pattern. It wasn't a melody, but something more mathematical, an oscillation between low and high frequencies, repeating every 17 seconds. After several minutes, faint voices could be heard beneath the hum. They were distorted, overlapping, fragmented. Some sounded distant, others whisper close. And just before the tape ended, a woman's voice, clear, terrified, spoke in Czech. "It's mapping us back." The journalist who leaked the file was later found unconscious in his car near the edge of the Bohumín forest, the engine still running, the driver's door open. He survived, though barely coherent, repeating the same phrase again and again. No echo, no echo. The recording was confiscated soon after, but copies had already circulated online, spawning endless analysis. Audio engineers claimed that hidden within the frequencies were impossible harmonics, tones beyond the range of human hearing, yet perceptible in the body as pressure or warmth. Others insisted the voices contained fragments of real names, maybe even the student's own. Meanwhile, researchers studying the physical map noticed something equally disturbing. The parchment, when kept under stable conditions, appeared to shift. Its ink darkened in some areas, lightened in others. At first, archivists suspected temperature or humidity changes. But after monitoring the document with high-resolution imaging, they realized that the symbols themselves were moving, slowly, imperceptibly over days and weeks, as though the map were alive, rewriting its own geography. The tunnels curved differently, the routes extended or contracted, and new markings emerged faintly before vanishing again. The map wasn't static. It was responsive. Something within it was still active. Speculation erupted. Some argued that the ink contained metallic compounds sensitive to magnetic shifts. Others suggested that the map acted as a kind of receiver, an instrument designed to resonate with signals emitted from beneath the earth. Whatever the explanation, the implications were terrifying. If the map was still responding, then whatever had once operated below the Czech border was not dead. That winter, an investigative unit known as Division IX, a rumored joint task force between Czech intelligence and NATO analysts, was sent into the region. Their mission, according to leaked documents, was to verify whether remnants of Project Nebel still existed. What they discovered, or perhaps awakened, would never be officially released, but fragments of their communication logs, intercepted through an anonymous source, painted a chilling picture. Transcript fragment. Operation Lucent. Division 9, Dex 12, 2023, 37-12. We're at Junction Point Bravo. The passage narrows here, almost closed off by mineral deposits. 037 Force. Do you hear that? It's not wind. It's like it's coming from inside the rock. 038 Otis. Team, record this. Frequency sweep picking up. 17 nodes of resonance. 03815. 17 again. Every scan. Same pattern. 03841. Wait. The readings are shifting. The signal is, wait, something's mapping our coordinates. Shut it. Transmission ends. The transmission terminated abruptly. Division 9's last known position was somewhere near the original tunnel system marked on the map. No recovery team was ever sent. The operation was quietly struck from official logs. Days later, a new crack appeared in the soil near the forest border, wide enough for water to collect and freeze. Locals avoided it instinctively, though a shepherd claimed that when he stood near it, he could hear faint voices rising from below. Like distant conversation, impossible to understand but rhythmic, almost patterned. He tried recording it with his phone. The device overheated and shut down. Meanwhile, international attention waned. News cycles moved on. The story of the 17 students faded back into niche forums, conspiracy channels, and the dark corridors of online folklore. Yet in the background, something persisted. Across the border in Poland, strange interference began affecting telecommunications near the same latitude. Emergency broadcasts triggered without human input. Train systems registered phantom signals, coordinates that matched the missing Division 9 team. It was as if the map's influence had begun to spread beyond the Czech soil, reasserting the same geometry that once guided those who vanished. In late 2024, a group of independent filmmakers traveled to the Bohumín forest, determined to create a documentary about the legend. They were never officially identified, only their equipment was recovered. 3 cameras, a drone, and a handheld audio recorder. The footage, later leaked anonymously, contained long static shots of the forest floor, faint breathing, and a repeating whisper too faint to belong to the filmmakers themselves. It was the same pattern as before. Under the echo, we wait. The whisper grew louder as the footage neared what appeared to be a sinkhole, and then the sound cut out completely. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It had texture, like the sound of something listening back. Some believe that all this, the recordings, the moving map, the missing people, is an elaborate modern myth, a collective haunting fueled by fear and coincidence. But those who live near the border know better. They say that the forest has changed. The snow no longer falls the same way. Footprints appear overnight that lead nowhere, and at dusk, if you stand still enough, you can hear the faint hum returning, pulsing through the frozen ground like a heartbeat buried too deep to die. Historians have long said that the past never truly disappears. It just waits for us to disturb it again. And perhaps that's what happened when the farmer uncovered that map, tearing open a wound the earth itself had tried to close. The students from 1944 might have failed to destroy what they found underground, and the world in its arrogance has awakened it once more. The story has begun to spread beyond the borders of fact, carried by those who still feel the vibrations at night, who still wake to the faint murmur of 17 voices calling from somewhere beneath. If you have followed this far, into the cold, echoing corridors of memory and time, remember to subscribe. The truth that waits beneath these borders is not done speaking, and you will need to hear what comes next. By early 2025, the border region had become a place of controlled denial. Officially, there was no ongoing investigation, no special operations, and no further anomalies recorded in the WWII forest. Yet the reality on the ground told a different story. Entire zones were quietly fenced off with military-grade barriers. Signs appeared overnight, written in Czech, German, and English. Zona akustikeho rizika, no entry beyond this point. Acoustic risk zone. No local authority had ever used that term before. It did not exist in any public database, but the phrase alone told its own story. That whatever haunted those tunnels was not inert. It had become something measurable, perhaps even contagious. The phenomenon wasn't limited to sound anymore. It had begun to distort space. Satellite images revealed that small sections of the forest seemed to shift slightly from month to month, as though the land were breathing. Geologists blamed subsidence, natural shifts in the earth caused by hidden caverns. But these explanations grew thin when researchers noticed that objects left near the perimeter sometimes vanished. Equipment, wildlife, even a parked vehicle once recorded on a surveillance camera. It would simply fade from one frame to the next, swallowed by a distortion that left behind only rippling air. A classified memo from late February, leaked to an independent journalist, described these events in chilling terms. Acoustic geometry expanding. Origin appears self-generative. Physical space behaving as harmonic medium. In simpler language, the map beneath the border, the one the students carried, the one recovered in 2023, had begun to manifest its own structure in the real world. The tunnels, the corridors, the nodes of resonance, they were growing outward, rewriting geography through vibration. At the center of this invisible bloom stood what officials referred to as the Naval Core Zone, the supposed origin of the pulse, first recorded by Dr. Vavarova's team. Attempts to reach it failed repeatedly. Drone footage became corrupted, compasses spun violently, and even timestamps in digital recordings began to desynchronize, drifting by seconds or minutes, depending on how close they were to the zone. It was as if time itself fractured near the source, stretched and folded by the same resonance that devoured the students 80 years earlier. Inside certain government circles, an unspoken panic spread. If the acoustic structure beneath the earth continued to expand, it could destabilize the surrounding area, or worse, propagate into other regions, replicating itself like a frequency infection. For the first time, the legend of the 17 was no longer treated as folklore, but as an early warning, a record of the first attempt to contain something that should never have existed. A secret meeting was held in Prague, attended by officials from the Czech Ministry of Defense, NATO science advisors, and a handful of physicists drawn from across Europe. Among them was Professor Erich Schneider, a German specialist in resonance phenomena who had previously worked with CERN. His later testimony, leaked months afterward, described the atmosphere of that meeting as funereal. According to him, the group reviewed data from sensors placed near the border. Every measurement showed the same pattern. 17 peaks, recurring at irregular intervals, each corresponding to a different section of the underground network. The frequencies weren't random. They formed a harmonic sequence, one that seemed to build toward a crescendo, as though something beneath the ground were tuning itself. Schneider presented a theory that chilled the room into silence. He proposed that the tunnels under the Czech border were not simply a network of escape routes or mining remnants. They were a machine, a resonant architecture designed to channel and amplify sound into structure. During the war, Project Naval might have sought to weaponize this discovery, using controlled vibrations to fracture enemy fortifications or disrupt human cognition. But the experiment had gone further. Somewhere during those late months of 1944, the system had awakened a deeper resonance, one that extended beyond material physics. The students, Schneider said, must have understood that the map was not just a guide. It was an interface, a way of shaping reality through frequency. If that were true, then their disappearance wasn't simply a tragedy. It was an erasure, a side effect of interacting with a system that could rewrite existence through sound. They hadn't just been lost, they had been overwritten. The silence that followed was broken only by the ticking of a clock in the meeting room, its rhythm disturbingly aligned with the 17-node pulse detected underground. Someone switched it off. In the following months, new efforts were made to contain the anomaly. Specialized acoustic dampeners were installed near the perimeter, designed to neutralize the lowest frequencies emitted from the tunnels. For a while, they worked. The hum beneath the forest weakened. Birds returned. Locals began to believe that whatever haunted the border had finally been buried again. But the illusion didn't last. In April 2025, seismic monitors across the region recorded a sudden spike, an underground event with no apparent cause. It wasn't an earthquake. The vibration patterns didn't match. Instead, they resembled the oscillations of a massive speaker, a wave pulsing outward from a single subterranean source. The hum returned, stronger than ever. And then, reports of missing persons began again. First a pair of border guards, then a survey team sent to repair damaged sensors, then 2 hikers who ignored the warning signs. No remains were ever recovered. Their last radio transmissions contained a single, repeated phrase, "It's opening." Meanwhile, in the digital realm, strange things began happening to those who studied the map. Archivists reported files that reappeared after deletion, photographs that developed new details over time. One researcher uploaded a high-resolution scan of the map to an academic server. Within hours, the image had changed on its own, new lines etched across the screen, forming a pattern that extended far beyond the original boundaries of the parchment. It was as though the map, through digital replication, had found new ground to inhabit, new layers to infect. The phrase, "It's opening," soon gained viral traction. Conspiracy channels adopted it as a slogan, while anonymous accounts shared coordinates said to correspond to the 17 resonance nodes. Some even claimed to hear low hums when playing back certain videos, frequencies supposedly inaudible to the human ear, yet capable of triggering physical sensations in the listener: dizziness, nausea, an inexplicable feeling of being watched. It was around this time that Professor Schneider disappeared. His last email, sent to a former colleague, contained an audio file titled response17.wave. The recording, later analyzed by multiple experts, featured a rhythmic pulse similar to the earlier field tests, but this time something answered. Between the beats, faint voices whispered in alternating German and Czech, repeating the same message: "We never left." The implication was unbearable. The 17 students erased from history might not have died at all. They might have become part of the resonance itself, integrated into the fabric of the tunnels, existing as patterns of vibration, a choir of the lost, forever echoing within the machinery of the earth. As spring deepened into summer, the anomaly began affecting nearby infrastructure. Electrical lines failed without reason. Train systems stalled when crossing specific coordinates. Radio operators along the border reported phantom transmissions in languages that defied identification. And in one instance, a civilian aircraft flying over the region lost all instrumentation for precisely 17 minutes, during which passengers reported seeing faint geometric shapes forming in the clouds below, circles intersecting like ripples on a black sea. Government silence persisted. No official acknowledgement was ever made. But deep in the restricted zone, in a temporary research facility erected above the sealed entrance, scientists continued their work. One technician, later interviewed anonymously, described a night when the entire compound vibrated at once. Every metal surface hummed. The lights flickered in perfect rhythm with the pulse beneath the ground, and from somewhere below the concrete floor came the unmistakable sound of human breathing. Not one person, but many, 17 voices, exhaling as one. The technician resigned the next day. When asked why, he simply said, "Because they're still counting." If you've followed this far into the dark, let that be your sign to like this video. It helps the story reach others who might feel the same vibration under their skin, the same whisper from beneath the echo. The map is still drawing itself, and the next line may trace right beneath your feet. By mid-2025, the Bohumín forest was no longer a forest in any traditional sense. The trees still stood, skeletal and silent beneath the haze of summer, but the ground beneath them no longer obeyed the same logic it once did. Instruments placed by researchers, those few still brave or desperate enough to enter the restricted zone, recorded impossible phenomena. Compass needles turning smoothly in circles without pause. GPS readings shifting in real time, as if the land itself were sliding beneath invisible tides. And every night, between the hours of 2:13 and 2:30 a.m., a vibration would pulse through the soil, faint at first, then growing until even the air seemed to tremble. Birds fell silent during those minutes. Dogs hid beneath furniture. People described dreams of vast corridors of stone, lit by no visible source, stretching into infinity. Those who lived within 20 kilometers of the border began to experience shared symptoms: headaches, tinnitus, insomnia. Doctors dismissed it as collective stress, but some patients described something more specific. They said they could hear voices, not inside their heads, but through walls, through windows, through the ground itself. Voices counting, 17 beats, then silence, then again. The government's efforts to contain the phenomenon had become almost ritualistic. Acoustic dampeners, electromagnetic fences, seismic injections meant to collapse the underground structures. None of it lasted. Each attempt at containment seemed to feed the resonance instead, like static, amplifying a broadcast. The Nebelcore zone was no longer confined to the Czech side. In Poland, minor tremors began to appear, all following the same 17-minute pattern. Farmers near the border reported new sinkholes forming in straight lines, connected by subtle indentations that mirrored the pattern of the tunnels on the map. The resonance was growing outward, geometrically precise, as if the world itself had begun to mimic the structure of the lost map. One of the last recorded investigations into the phenomenon came from a freelance documentarian named Eliška Hraudová, who had lost her great-grandfather in the 1944 disappearance. Unlike others, she didn't seek fame or answers, only closure. In late August 2025, she traveled to the edge of the restricted zone with a small team of sound engineers and former soldiers. Her plan was to record the pulse in its purest form, believing it might reveal a pattern, a message, from the vanished students. Her footage, later leaked anonymously, begins like any ordinary field recording. The camera shakes with movement, flashlights cutting through mist. The group approaches a section of fencing, its metal wires humming faintly. Ilishka's voice, steady but subdued, narrates softly in Czech. We are entering the line of the 17th echo. The pulse is strongest here. Then the camera tilts toward the ground. A shallow pit, black as oil, stretches before them, barely 2 meters wide. A low, rhythmic vibration can be heard, like a distant engine or the slow beating of a heart. As the sound intensifies, the air begins to shimmer. The camera lens distorts, as though submerged in heat. The hum becomes unbearable, climbing in frequency, and the ground starts to ripple like liquid. One of the sound engineers shouts that his equipment is picking up modulations, patterns hidden within the frequency. He filters them live, and for a moment, voices emerge, faint, overlapping, impossible to locate. We held the line. We held the sound. Do not map it again. Then, silence. The footage cuts to static. The next scene, believed to have been recorded minutes later, shows the camera lying on the ground, its light flickering. The pit is empty. No one speaks. Only a faint whisper remains, repeating the same words over and over in English. It's not beneath us anymore. None of the team were ever found. Only the equipment was recovered, though the memory cards were warped beyond recovery, as if melted from within. Yet somehow, copies of the footage surfaced online 2 weeks later. Analysts who examined the video noticed something terrifying. Frame by frame, faint silhouettes could be seen moving at the edge of the light. 17 of them, standing in perfect formation, motionless, their outlines shimmering like heat against stone. The effect of the leaked footage on public consciousness was immediate. Fear rippled across social media. Some claimed the images triggered auditory hallucinations. Others said they could hear the hum just by watching. Within a week, the government issued takedown orders across every platform, labeling the material psychoacoustic contamination. But it was too late. The sound had already spread. Users across the world reported hearing low vibrations after viewing the clip, especially through headphones. Some claimed their devices began producing faint tones on their own long after the video was deleted. By September, the hum had gone global. Scientists at observatories in Germany, Russia, and Canada recorded a synchronized frequency spike, an inaudible pulse repeating every 17 minutes, identical to the one first detected beneath the Czech border. It moved across continents, untraceable, like a shadow of sound. What had once been a localized haunting had become a planetary phenomenon, and in each country, reports began to surface of people vanishing under mysterious circumstances, always near regions with underground caverns or old wartime structures. The media called it the Echo Pandemic. Governments denied everything, but fragments of leaked documents revealed that at least 6 nations had detected the same pattern buried in seismic noise. 17 nodes, growing stronger with each cycle. One physicist compared it to a network booting itself, a machine reawakening after decades of dormancy. The Earth is remembering its own wound, he wrote. Meanwhile, those who lived near the original border described new phenomena, shadows moving independently of their owners, reflections that arrived a second too late, voices calling from radios even when unplugged. One priest from Ostrava claimed to have received confessions whispered through the church walls, confessions belonging to names from 1944, people long dead. When asked to describe what the voices said, he answered only, They are learning to speak again. As the world struggled to comprehend, a final discovery pushed the legend into something far darker. An archaeologist examining the original 2023 map under scanning electron microscopy found that the ink wasn't organic at all. It contained microscopic metallic filaments, conductive strands woven into the parchment itself. The ink was not ink. It was circuitry. Each line of the map formed part of a complex resonant design, one capable of transmitting or receiving signals. The map was never meant to guide anyone through tunnels. It was the machine. The implications were catastrophic. The students hadn't carried directions. They had carried a trigger. Their disappearance, the hum, the growing resonance, all of it might have begun when they activated something buried beneath the border, something that had waited quietly for nearly 80 years to complete its design. Now with the map scanned, shared, uploaded, its pattern existed everywhere. Every digital copy acted as a small fragment of the larger circuit, broadcasting, connecting, amplifying. Humanity had finished what the 17 had started. When the realization spread among researchers, it was already too late. Devices around the world began emitting low, synchronized tones. Even in places thousands of kilometers from the Czech Republic, people described the same feeling of pressure in their skulls, the same trembling beneath their feet. The resonance had escaped the Earth's core. It was inside the data, inside the signal, inside us. And yet, amidst the chaos, a strange calm settled over those who had once resisted it. Survivors of earlier field expeditions reported a shift in their dreams. The tunnels were no longer frightening. The voices no longer sounded like warnings, but invitations. "They're not gone," one said. "They're building something new through us." Whether that meant salvation or the beginning of something we cannot yet define, no one could say. But every night, the hum grew louder, and the air thickened with the memory of those 17 steps disappearing into the snow, walking not toward escape, but toward creation. The world has become the map now, and if you can still hear the hum, even faintly, like a low breath beneath your heartbeat, then it's already reaching you too. Like this story. So it spreads a little farther, so the signal keeps growing, so the voices never fall silent again. By the end of 2025, the world had begun to hum. Cities reported it first. Faint, constant, inaudible to most, yet felt by all, like pressure beneath the ribs. It came through everything, the air, the glass, the electricity running in the walls. Governments insisted it was infrastructure strain, an electrical artifact, mass suggestion. But it wasn't. It was rhythm. 17 pulses, silence, then 17 again. And in that silence, the strange feeling that something was listening from the other side of the quiet. In November, recordings from observatories around the world confirmed what many already feared. The signal was global, synchronized, and directional, rising from beneath the crust and radiating outward like an inverted heartbeat. At the same moment each day, clocks in different time zones drifted out of sync by exactly 17 seconds. It was as though time itself were leaning toward something, stretching to match the pulse. Then came the disappearances, not of individuals now, but of places. A radio tower in northern Finland, swallowed overnight by a sinkhole that left no debris. A research base in Greenland, gone between satellite scans. A small Czech village near the original border, Dolní Lutyně, the birthplace of the legend, vanished completely. When rescue teams arrived, they found no footprints, no ruins, only a perfectly circular depression in the earth, as though the village had been pressed down gently and absorbed into the soil, 17 kilometers across. News outlets tried to keep up with the panic, but broadcasts began to fail. Static overtook frequencies, and within that static, faint words could sometimes be heard. "We are mapping you back." Audio engineers who isolated the noise discovered layers beneath the speech, harmonics forming shapes when rendered visually, shapes identical to the symbols on the lost map. The resonance wasn't a message. It was architecture, rebuilding itself through sound. As this realization spread, entire communication networks began collapsing. Devices connected to the internet emitted the pulse even when powered off. People covered their ears and still heard it from inside their skulls. The hum had transcended technology. It was in the flesh now, in bone conduction, in blood. Hospitals reported patients entering fugue states, speaking languages unknown to any living linguist. Some ancient, some not human at all. When these voices were recorded and analyzed, the spectrograms revealed impossible detail: tunnels, corridors, intersections, spirals. A cartography of sound. The pattern was unmistakable. The tunnels were no longer underground. They were inside us. Every heartbeat, every inhalation, every whispered breath became another coordinate in the map's geometry. Humanity itself had become the continuation of the lost design. Across Europe, those most sensitive to the resonance began to gather. Drawn to certain locations by instinct, they moved as if following silent instruction. Some disappeared into old mines, others into abandoned subway systems, their movements synchronized by the unseen rhythm. Drone footage later revealed that their paths, when mapped, formed perfect replicas of the 17-node structure from the original map. These were not random wanderers. They were rebuilding the network, completing the map's final layer. The few who resisted described what they saw when the resonance peaked. Streets bending subtly, as if the world had softened. Buildings breathing in sync with the hum. Shadows stretching toward the source of the sound, dragging their owners behind. At the height of each pulse, mirrors rippled. For a split second, reflections showed places that did not exist. Vast corridors of stone filled with slow-moving figures. Some claimed those figures looked familiar, like faces remembered from old photographs. Among them were the 17 students. It is said that on the last clear night before Dolní Lutině vanished, a group of travelers stopped on a nearby hill and saw lights beneath the frozen fields. Faint and golden, like lanterns moving through glass. 17 of them, marching in silence toward the border that no longer existed. One of the witnesses, an elderly man who had been a child during the war, described it in his final recording. They were walking home. The ground was open for them, and they weren't afraid anymore. No one knows whether this was salvation or assimilation, whether those lights were souls released or mechanisms reactivated. But one thing became undeniable. The resonance had achieved what it sought. The world itself had become the continuation of the lost experiment. There was no longer a difference between above and below, between the listener and the echo. The map was complete. In the ruins of Prague, after the last blackout, a group of surviving archivists found fragments of Dr. Vavrova's personal notes preserved on analog film. In her final entry, dated only day 17, she wrote, "It isn't a machine. It's memory. The sound is how the earth remembers us." The students weren't lost. They were translated. The resonance is translation, turning what we were into structure. Maybe that's what the afterlife always was. Not heaven or hell, but architecture. The world itself learning to speak our names until we become part of its grammar. After that entry, the tape falls silent. Then a faint hum begins. No one knows how long the resonance lasted, or if it ever truly ended. Perhaps the silence we hear now is only its resting phase, waiting for someone to find another fragment of the map, to redraw another line. Every so often, deep microphones placed in forgotten boreholes still record faint sounds that don't match any known seismic activity. 17 pulses. Pause. Then a low, slow exhale. Those who've studied the phenomenon say that if you listen long enough, you'll begin to hear a voice within the pattern, distant but growing closer, whispering the same question the students must have asked when they reached the place where the echo stopped. Are we the ones who disappeared, or did the world disappear around us? The hum answers now, in everything, in the rhythm of trains, the murmur of cities, the pulse beneath your skin. Listen carefully. You can almost hear it. The world breathing, mapping itself through you. So if you've followed this far into the dark, if you've heard the hum behind these words, remember, the story isn't over. Like this video so the signal carries farther. Subscribe, so the next transmission reaches you when the silence opens again. And leave a comment telling us from where you are listening now, so the map knows where to grow next.